Welcome to this event. Thank you all for bearing the elements to be with us today. It pleases me to know that the Catholic Society is now seen as a force sufficient to warrant a protest against it. Whilst we share different views to our brothers and sisters, before the eyes of God, we're all equal, and we should never forget that. Let Pope Francis be our example and share love and compassion with the world, not anger. I'm proud as a Catholic to stand by my beliefs, and I implore all of you to be as well. The attendance we have at this event, the courage that all of you show in face of defiance, it gives us hope that our faith is alive amongst the youth. Never forget that we are one universal church, and we all stand together. We will not splinter to the pressure of those who do not respect our beliefs. We owe our faith far more than that. We're very fortunate to have an expert team of speakers for our panel, from politicians to healthcare professionals and activists. The Honourable Greg Donnelly has been a member of the New South Wales Legislative Council representing the Labor Party since 2005. He has been an advocate for the pro-life cause ever since in the political arena. He has led the push behind Zoe's Law, a bill before Parliament to recognise human life in the womb. Rosina Gordon holds a Bachelor of Music and Sound Engineering. She was involved in the media field, working for Channel 9 in Brisbane. She later joined Campion College and HP. Rosie is a mother of 5 children, with one more on the way. She was the founder of the Awesome Mothers Association and has written submissions to the Childcare Senate Commission. She's also a prominent member of the Catholic Women's League. Debbie Garratt is the Executive Director of Real Choices Australia. She's a healthcare professional with extensive experience in the development of training courses in adult education and counselling. Debbie speaks both nationally and internationally on relationships, education, and health issues. Debbie is travelling from Albury to be with us today, and unfortunately her flight was slightly delayed, so she'll be with us shortly. Please put a hand of applause for our speakers.
Hi guys, my name's Laura. Again, I just want to reiterate what Alessandro said. Welcome to this event. It's so great that you can be here, particularly with this horrid weather. I just want to give you a quick rundown of what's happening. We're going to start with our speakers here. They're going to have a bit of time just to let you know some of their thoughts on this issue of abortion. Then we're going to open it up to questions. I'll say it again, but I'm going to say it right now. We definitely want your questions, but if they can be questions rather than statements, that would be really good. If you make a statement, I am going to have to cut you off, and I don't want to have to do that, so please keep it to questions. Again, welcome to everyone. We're really glad that this event can go ahead, and we're sure it's going to be a great discussion. So, Greg, I'll start with you, I think.
Thanks. Thank you. I don't know if I should stand or sit down. I've got to say, it feels a little bit awkward sitting up here on a raised level, looking down at you all. It's not quite the right feel, but in any event, I don't want to come across as lecturing or telling or directing. We'd like to try and get away with that in Parliament as much as we can, telling the other side what to do. Normally quite unsuccessfully because I'm in the opposition at the moment in the State Parliament. But I do look forward to the exchange we can have a little bit later on when I've completed my few comments. Can I say that I'm more than happy that when we get to questions, feel free to pepper me, and I presume our other speakers, with the most curly questions you like. The issue that we're addressing today is an issue that agitates great feeling and sentiment and strong views and attitudes out in the community, not just here on the Sydney University campus, but the community at large. And the views that I'll be expressing today, and the views I'm sure of the other speakers in this panel, we're very proud of and unapologetic about, and seek the opportunity when we can to sort of speak about them and defend them in the public domain. And whilst people have different views, and we understand that, there's always got to be an ability to allow others to properly present their arguments, present their sort of views and attitudes, and discuss them in a sensible and a civilised way. Can I commence by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we're having our meeting today, and I pay my respects to elders, both past and present. And can I commence by thanking specifically the Catholic Society of St Paul here at the University of Sydney for organising this panel session as part of Life Week 2015, and I want to acknowledge the Society and congratulate for what is this the fourth year of Life Week. I could be wrong, but at least a succession of Life Week initiatives, and may there be many more to come. The profound and the existential issues about the questions of human life and death do not, and I believe, cannot go out of fashion. They are intrinsic to who we are as human beings, and there can be no better places to engage and discuss these most important issues as our universities. The matters being discussed this afternoon, and I'm sure at the other events over the course of last week, that have been organised by the Society, simply will not go out of season. Every generation cannot escape confronting these issues and coming to their own considered decisions about them. However, I only claim to speak with respect to my own experience. So what I'm going to present today are my thoughts and my reflections that have come about, I think, over a period of time from what I'd hope to consider to myself to be some reasonably deep reflection about these issues. And I understand people can come to the same conclusion from a different route, and also they can come to quite a different outcome taking other routes as well. But when I was sitting down to prepare to what I'd say for today, I thought, well, should I go through a whole range of issues and try and line them all up with a response and an answer and sort of just present it that way? Or should I just try and look back at my own experience with respect to my thinking on these issues and present that and perhaps make some reflections, and that's what I've decided to do. But sort of going back to this issue of our universities and debating and discussing these matters, I believe that it's very unsatisfying if we just simply slavishly take uninterrogated the views of other people. I mean, we all inherit views that are passed down to us from various sources. But at the end of the day, I think particularly as people who are fortunate enough to receive tertiary education, it's incumbent on us to really think about deeply issues and come to our considered conclusions. It's really easy to just say something that you've read about or you've heard someone say. I mean, that's the easy way out. But our time at universities provide us with a great opportunity to do some serious interrogation of ideas and challenge what may well be considered at a particular point in time the status quo of a position. Now, in reflecting on what I could contribute as part of the panel today, as I said, I was somewhat overwhelmed by the various ways in which I could approach the topic. And I must say I did endeavour to make a bit of a list so I could try and be exhaustive as I could be. But that list just kept going longer and longer and longer. So I thought to myself, well, in any event, even if I did make a list, why would any of my views on the issue of abortion be of particular interest to anybody in this room, or perhaps anyone on this university campus? Because I'm sure that the arguments both for and against abortion are well known to everyone present here today, and it would not be as if I had some new rabbit that I was going to pull out of the hat and show you. In fact, I did ask myself if my presence today would serve in any useful purpose at all. And I guess no doubt others will pass judgment on that at the end of the event. However, as I was thinking about the issues about abortion, my mind cast back to a function I organised in the New South Wales Parliament in 2012. Now, as a member of the New South Wales Legislative Council, I frequently travel around the state, and I do this as part of my formal responsibilities of the Legislative Council, but I also do it in a more informal way as a person who's a member of a political party, and I have responsibilities that go with that. So it's an interesting role being a politician. You do have specific duties that flow from being a member of Parliament and matters you are tasked with in that role of being a member of Parliament, whether in the upper house or lower house. But you also are out and about doing a fair bit of what you probably call loosely political work for the respective party that you are a member of. And both those actually have you cause to sort of travel around the state a fair bit. I might say more so for a member of the upper house, because in the lower house, as you know, the lower house members have their elected or their constituency, and they spend most of their time in that constituency, but in the upper house, we have pretty much a free rein, so to speak, and get around the state. Probably sticking our nose sometimes into places that it's not welcome, but in any event, that's what upper house members do. Try and keep those lower house members in check. As I travel around the state, and as I've done so the last number of years, and as it was said in the introduction, I entered the New South Wales Legislative Council in 2005. Both directly and indirectly, I got to be introduced to, I've used this phrase deliberately but also reluctantly, a group of people. So I'm not comfortable with the phrase group of people, but bear with me. A group of people who are mainly invisible to the public eye, who struck me then over the course of the last few years, and they still do now, as highly vulnerable individuals in need of understanding, care and support. Now, these people that I got to meet as I travelled around the state crossed the socio-economic spectrum from one end to the other, so there was no barrier, so to speak, in where you would find such people. So they could be in the wealthiest suburbs of eastern Sydney, or in a very poor, remote location in regional New South Wales. It was right across the spectrum. They lived in our big cities, as I said, and also in our smallest villages out in the country. They were both young and also mature in years. They were, from a relationship point of view, single, some in de facto relationships, and some were actually married. And they were Australian citizens in the main, but also individuals, particularly students who were here on either working and or study visas. And what I'm talking about specifically are girls and women with an unplanned pregnancy who were struggling with the circumstances they found themselves in, but who wanted to, and I've said this quite deliberately, that they wanted to, or were inclined to, or they were open to the possibility of carrying on with their pregnancy. However, for reasons that were often beyond their control, they found themselves alone, often isolated with nowhere to live. Also, in many instances, suffering the scars of domestic violence, both physical and psychological. Often no money at all. And a number of them often had the feeling that they actually had no future at all. In other words, in considering their position in life and looking into the future, they had a very pessimistic outlook of what life had in store for them. Now, being male, I do not pretend to be able to fully comprehend what these girls and women were going through with respect to the circumstances that they found themselves in. What I did discover was that around the state there were some individuals and generally small organisations who were working diligently to understand, to care and support these girls and women. Now these organisations were mostly run by volunteers, and just to be clear, I'm not talking about past tense here. These organisations are still operating now, but I'm talking about my experience over the last few years. But they're mostly run by volunteers, receiving little financial support from anybody. They do their own fundraising, and they rely on the generosity of their supporters. Some had and some have religious affiliation, but most, in my experience, do not. Now, in April 2012, when I decided for the first time to bring together a number of these individuals and organisations for a morning tea in Parliament House, for what I considered and still consider as vitally important work in our community, what surprised me, and it's the thing that surprised me more than anything else, and I have very clear recollection of the morning, was that many of the people in the room did not know each other. They were from around the state, some working by themselves in relatively isolated locations. They were mainly women who felt deeply about the work that they were doing, and they were open, friendly and enthusiastic to share their experiences and their perspectives. But as I said, I did find it quite surprising that they were out there all around the state doing this work, often with very, very limited resources, and in some instances by themselves, doing it out of their homes or out of a small back office in an industrial site, or I could go on and on and on, but often unaware that there were many other like-minded people, as I said, in the main women like themselves, doing this work right across the state. Now, of course, there obviously were people who did know each other because they just had been put in contact with each other by individuals who were trying to get them to sort of cooperate better and do more work. But in the main, they are out there just doing this by themselves. Now, time today doesn't permit me to share with you all the details about the individuals and the organisations undertaking this important work in the community. And anyone wanting some specific information can see me after we've concluded the panel discussion. But what I can tell you is that when I sat down and wrote up the details of the attendees of that morning tea and what were they doing and what they were doing, it came to over 15 A4 pages of information. So in that small room, I ultimately was able to put together a not insignificant document about all these individuals and organisations around the state doing this work, providing that understanding, the care and support for the girls and the women with the unplanned or unexpected pregnancy. Now, I can't go through the whole list, and that time just doesn't permit that, but I would like, though, in the time that I have left, to comment briefly on 5 of these organisations that I've come to discover and hold in high regard. Now, this is just 5 of a number, but I think hopefully when I go through them, and I won't take too much time looking at each one, it'll be quite illustrative to you that there are some quite disparate individuals and groups out there who identify a real deep need to be served. And they have taken it upon themselves to observe that need and do something about it without much support. Now, the first one I'll just mention briefly, and I will sort of go through this relatively quickly, is that, and this is an example of a secular organisation, the Australian Red Cross runs a young parents program and I had the privilege of going out there a couple or so years ago. It's out in the eastern suburbs to meet with the director of that program, and they are doing outstanding work looking after girls and women with unplanned pregnancies who wish to proceed to have a child, who often have multiple issues like drug addiction or alcohol addiction, or may have been exposed to domestic violence, but provide very high quality case managed care of these girls and women, to look after them whilst in the latter part of their pregnancy, through to birth and the period after birth, to provide them with the stability they need, and then to try and, from that, articulate them into perhaps some study, access to social housing, access to various non-government organisations that are able to support them for where they are in their life at that point. And I've seen that Australian Red Cross Young Parents program grow, not through anything that I've done, but rather just observe it and pass a few comments about it in Parliament, whereby they really just can't find, so to speak, enough accommodation to meet the need that's out there. I mean, there is just no issue that if they have the funding, if they have the facilities like the buildings, they are able to provide spots for people pretty much straight away. There is just no doubt whatsoever the need's there. Another one which is worth commenting on, and this is a wonderful example of something which was set up essentially by a woman by herself with a small number of like-minded friends, is called Diamond Pregnancy Support. Probably haven't heard about it. It established itself in the first instance out in Western Sydney in the suburb of Kingswood. Has now moved and set up an office in Macquarie Fields in southwestern Sydney, and is about to, as I understand, by about the middle of the year, going to have an office out at Norwest. So these are three fully functioning offices when the third one gets established, mainly engaging volunteers who are there to field phone calls and to deal with women, girls walking off the street who wish to proceed, have their child, but are in pretty desperate circumstances. These offices are manned by people, some but not all have formal qualifications in counselling, but are well and truly able to provide some ability to just listen to the people as they come in or speak to them over the telephone, and to talk about how there is a way in which they can proceed and have their child, and that they are able to continue on in their life and look forward to a wonderful future. So, over the course of what is a relatively short period of time, only 2 and 3 years, I've seen Diamond Pregnancy Support grow from 1 to 2 to now 3 offices in Western Sydney. Another outstanding program that I came across, and this was quite by accident, was associated with my duties as a Member of Parliament. I have responsibility for the Central Coast. And I was told about, second-hand, a program run by St Philip's Christian School, which has a campus in White, I just forget the actual suburb of Newcastle, but it's Waratah, in the suburb of Newcastle, and also a campus on the Central Coast. But what St Philip's Christian School do is they specifically run a program called their Dale Young Mothers Program. And it specifically caters for girls, often they could be in year 10 or 11 or 12, who are pregnant but want to proceed, have a child, but wish to continue on to complete their education either at the year 10 level or 11 through to 12 HSC. And what they've done is they've set themselves up with classrooms and teachers and a whole set of services that they wrap around to support the young women, to assist them to balance both completing their studies at the high school level and to support them to be able to, as I said, do those studies at school during essentially school hours, although it's more flexible than your traditional school hours. Have the child, if they have relatively children, minded while they do that, and once a child's born, to be able to continue to have that child looked after while they continue through to complete their study. And of course, and then from that point, to articulate into perhaps a TAFE course or even in some instances some tertiary studies. But I had the great fortune of going up there about 18 months ago and actually sat in with the girls and the teachers, and I was just delighted to sort of see how much effort had gone into putting together a very practical way to provide support, which I might say, if you think about it, wasn't really too hard to do, but it did require sort of someone to do it, and they decided to do that as a school. It's obviously a private school with resources, so it's decided to allocate some resources to provide this and make this available. The second last place I want to mention is a place called Garratt House. Now, it's actually not in New South Wales, it's down in the ACT. For anyone in the room, and I've said this in a speech in Parliament I gave, because I've spoken on this issue on Parliament about 3 or 4 times over the last few years, but if anyone wants to examine what I judge to be a gold standard, and I don't say that lightly, a gold standard, when it comes to supporting girls and women in these circumstances, you actually can't go past Garratt House in the ACT. This year marks its 15th year of operation, once again established by a small number of highly motivated women. There's some men now involved who play a role because the organisation now is much expanded. But what it did in the first instance, without going through the full history, was that it actually persuaded the ACT government to make available at a peppercorn rent 2 houses, which were houses that were otherwise used for social housing in the ACT. And the first house they called Garratt House, and that was for the mothers-to-be. And they weren't all young girls, right across the board actually, in terms of the profile of the girls and women attending. But Garratt House housed them up to the point of confinement, and after the birth they would transition to Erin House, which was for the mothers and the babies. And they built this up over, as I said now, 15 years, whereby, and this is just a wonderful piece of news, that they've actually, through their fundraising activities and now some subsequent support by the ACT government, have built now, and I haven't been down to see them yet, purpose-built units, quite elegant, quite specifically built to sort of cater for the work that they do, to provide this enhanced housing opportunity for the girls and the women whilst pregnant and also in the period after the birth. And their intention is to hand back to the ACT government the 2 houses that they were provided with a peppercorn rent so many years ago. But they've got 2 outstanding purpose-built facilities that they have just worked away at, fundraising, and because this particular initiative has got such a high reputation down in the ACT, because the ACT, I don't know anyone's from the ACT, is a relatively small community and people know what goes on and are very aware of what's happening down there. It's got such a critical mass of support down there that it's been able to, as I say, fundraise and now build these outstanding facilities. And the final one I'll mention is what is a very small operation, for using the phrase. It's called Sarah's Place. And what it is, it's just a shop front over in Surrey Hills, manned, person by, mainly young, teenage and tertiary-aged women and some other women, who there operate what is in a walk-in service and a telephone counselling service for girls and women who are looking for some support. You know, they find themselves in difficult situations. I mean, I've spoken to Linda many times. Linda runs the place, and a common example, without going into specific details, are young women from Southeast Asia, in many cases China, who are here in Australia studying, and they fall pregnant. Now the boyfriend all of a sudden disappears, and they are in all sorts of difficulties in terms of making decisions about how they're going to cope with their circumstances. You know, often very, very difficult circumstances, you know, such that there's sort of thoughts of suicide and you know, serious action to be taken by them because of the predicament they find themselves in. But what they do at Sarah's place is just talk to these people, give them a cup of tea, and just explore, you know, what the reality of their situation is, but also what the possibilities are. And through developing a relationship and talking with them and giving them some guidance, and they themselves don't have much resources at all. I mean, they sort of have to point them in certain directions and give some general advice, but at the end of the day, they don't have resources as such to be able to sort of fund high levels of support for them. But find that they, you know, have a constant, you know, flow, so to speak, of people coming in or being referred to and just having to talk about what the possibilities are. Now, in specifically acknowledging that these organisations that I've gone through, and it's been in a very superficial way, and I appreciate that. You know, I do want to pay tribute to all the others that I've been working with and sort of have discovered over the last few years, because you know, they all, in their own way, some of them, as I said, are operating as single-person operations, working from someone's sort of room in their house, or, as I said, they might get cheap rent in a small shop front somewhere. They are doing some wonderful, wonderful work, but you know, in the main, completely out of the eye of the public, and really not appreciated much at all. But the ongoing work being undertaken by those that I've mentioned today, to say nothing about all the ones that I don't even know about, and I don't even pretend to have in my presentation on Tuesday, a comprehensive explanation of what's out there. It comes about, the work comes about because they're meeting a need. These individuals are doing this work and their organisations are meeting a need. And you know, I suspect it is a deeply burning human need. The girls and the women are engaging with these services and are doing it themselves, or are being, in some cases, referred to by family and friends. But they're engaging in these services because they are meeting a need that is not being met elsewhere. And for the girls who have been involved, who I've met, and who have been fortunate to come into contact with these organisations, and often it's just been by pure chance, but most importantly, not the organisations, but the individuals who are involved in the work that's done there. The lives of these individuals have been changed profoundly for the good. And it is for this reason that I believe that such organisations will not only continue to survive, but flourish in the future. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys. Oh, we have Debbie! Debbie's here! Do you want to grab a seat over there, Debbie? Isn't that exciting? So we're just going to hear from Rosie. I'm so sorry, this day has been chaos. We're just going to hear a few minutes from Rosie and then also from Debbie, and then we're going to get to questions. So keep those questions in your mind because we definitely want to have them. But Rosie, thank you. Thank you, Laura.
I will try to keep it short. I'm not here to tell anyone what to do, but I am here simply to share my philosophy on. Originally, I was asked to share my philosophy on abortion. to me that encompasses a lot of other things. It's a philosophy on life and fertility and pregnancy and family and childbirth. So I'll do my best. As they said in the introduction, I'm married, I've got 5 children, and I'm now pregnant with number 6. When I was pregnant with my 3rd child, I went to the GP, and it was a random GP, I didn't know them. I just went to get a referral for my obstetrician, and I already had 2 children, so I took them along with me. One was 1 year old, and one was, he must have been about 18 months or something, and she was 10 months old. So I had these 2 children with me. It was quite chaotic. The GP was young, about my age or even younger. She looked at me, and I think she intended compassion. She looked at me and she said, "Is this what you want?" And I have to say, to this day, I'm still perplexed by the question. I really don't know how to answer that. So eventually I got my referral. This is what I'm doing. I'm pregnant, I'm married. And but throughout my marriage, until I found a good Catholic pro-life GP, I was constantly badgered by medical practitioners that we needed to get this contraception issue sorted. So when I was pregnant with my 4th, I was living in Canberra, so we didn't know anyone. I just went to a random GP and I said, "I'm really sick, I can't stand this, I need something, what are you going to do? Can you help me?" And she said, "You can take contraception. It's not against your religion. It won't kill any of your children." And I just thought, I'm getting a theology lecture from a GP who doesn't even know me. And I became quite desperate because I felt unsupported everywhere I looked. I even had some good Catholic people talk to me about responsible spacing of children. And when you're feeling sick and tired and you've got really active children running around everywhere and you've got to stay awake and you've got to be there for them, the last thing you need is someone giving you a lecture on your moral responsibility and how you should be running your marriage. The truth is, nobody really knows that they're going to get pregnant. I've got friends who use natural fertility, so that the way their body works, they map it out and they know when they're fertile and when they're not, and they use that to space their children, but they were really shocked when they decided, okay, we're ready for the next one now, and they couldn't get pregnant. It's just, they've never had the pill or any of the synthetic hormones, they've never been big drinkers or lived wild lifestyles, their health was good. It's just not something that you can really predict. If you look around, like on the Murray Stokes website, it says the reality is 50% of pregnancies are unplanned or unexpected. And the truth is, what's really going on is it's all predicated by this misconception that you can control your fertility. You can switch it on when you want it and you can switch it off when you don't. It's really not as simple as that. Now I'm pregnant with number 6 and I wasn't expecting it. I thought I was too old. I'm actually over 40. That puts me in the high risk category for Down syndrome, other complications. So my doctor, who's actually an IVF doctor, is adamant. She sat me down, she's told me all the risks. She said, "Now you can do this $600 test, we send it to the States. We can tell you perfectly if you're going to have a Down syndrome baby. You can do this nucleofold test. There is a risk you could miscarry if you do that test." And she ran through all the options and she said, "It's my responsibility," because they're now paying, my sister's an obstetrician, they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in indemnity insurance because they're going to get sued because their doctor didn't tell them that baby you're carrying might not be perfect. And I said to her, you know who we are, you know what we're like, you didn't put this baby in here, you're not responsible for how healthy it is or not, all you can do is help me take the pregnancy to its natural end. And she's happy with that, she's okay. But that didn't stop her from the next time saying, now just once again, are you doing that test? Are you going to spend the $600? Are you going to go and get that? And she's okay now, she's accepted it. It's unfortunate that we've come to this point now where people actually see it a little bit strange that married people have children, and we're constantly confronted with the questions. Do you have a TV? Don't you know what causes it? And the consequences of that is now a generation of women who, some of them are quite angry that they missed out. There was the ABC News reader Virginia Harsinger, She wrote a book called Wonder Woman, The Myth of Having It All. And she said, girls like me listen to our mothers and trailblazing feminist teachers. For those of us who forged ahead and carved out successful, even brilliant careers, we're now left, many of us, as premature empty nesters. I'm childless and I'm angry that I was so foolish to take the word of my feminist mothers as gospel. There was Betty Friedan, the trailblazing feminist, who wrote In the Feminine Mystique in her 1963 book. That was the book, that set women on paths to careers and equality, eschewing motherhood. Don't go there. And she has now said in her 1981 sequel, The Second Stage, she says, the equality we fought for isn't livable and isn't workable. And then Pamela Bone, who was the associate editor at The Age, said older feminists should spread the word. Careers can wait, but biology can't. And this is what I hear all the time from my friends nearing 50. I wish I had started earlier and had more children. I'm not saying that for people who do have careers and who are successful and who haven't found someone to marry that they're doing the wrong thing. They're doing what they're doing. We all have a vocation and we all have a different calling and we all have different strengths. There's people like the Australian of the Year, the doctor who invented the spray-on skin. I think she has 5 children. There's some amazing women out there, but I personally couldn't do both. I would be constantly thinking, who am I going to let down today? My boss, my husband, or my children? And I would be in a constant state of anxiety about just juggling which one's more important. It's a sad statement. What Pope Francis said, if a generous family of children is viewed as if it were a burden, there is something wrong, because life rejuvenates and acquires energy when it multiplies. It is enriched and not impoverished. It's kind of strange that when it comes to birth control and things, that you wouldn't eat a whole chocolate cake and expect not to put on weight. But we seem to have this belief that we can lead an active sexual lifestyle and there'll be no physical consequences. There's over 13 types of birth control available now, and yet we still have approximately 100,000 abortions a year in Australia, because it just doesn't seem to be the panacea that everyone thought it might be. It was supposed to be about emancipation and it was supposed to be about liberation. The tables seem to be turning now. You know, G.K. Chesterton said about birth control, he said there'll be no births and there'll be no control. We're now facing this population demographic issue. We're facing these economic problems because we don't have enough workers, we've got excess retirees. But that's another story that could go on for a long time. I just think I'm kind of with Tony Abbott. It's sad that our hearts have become so hardened that so many women see this as their only option. And like what Greg's saying, these women now who are finding themselves pregnant and they're not supported by the people in their life, the people who got them there, the people who got them pregnant. It's that kind of, that it's just using. It's just people are just out there using each other and there's no love. And what seems strange to me is that they've walked away from marriage and the shackles that brings with it and the lack of freedom, and they've ended up shackled in another way, and it's I'd say very unpleasant. Anyway, I won't take more of your time. I'll pass over to Debbie.
I'm incredibly vain or anything, but I did just get off a plane and it was incredibly blustery and I walked in the rain and all I'm seeing is the camera. So let's not put it on YouTube or something, that's what I said. I'm not sure a comb will do anything with this. I wasn't sure how long I was going to have to speak, so someone please give me a signal. I'll try to keep it very short, but I've brought some material with me, but mostly what I want to do is tell you what the focus of my work is. and then give you perhaps a few facts and figures, and you can then, obviously there's going to be time for questions after that. So my work is primarily around identifying the unmet needs of women experiencing unintended and challenging pregnancies, and then ensuring that both public and professional sectors have access to that information, as well as credible, factual, evidence-based information about the potential harm of some reproductive health decisions, and that includes abortion. We also discuss other issues such as IVF, etc. We're not a religiously based or affiliated organisation. We work on the social issues and the medical and health issues only. The other thing we really work hard to do is try to break through the ideological barriers and the language associated with abortion, where at one end of the ideological spectrum we can often hear language and ideas which demonise women who may consider or have abortions, or who speak with regret about their abortions later, and so those women really have nowhere to go. And at the other end, we have the same kinds of demonising language, which I saw aptly demonstrated that, we were targeted on Facebook last night, by protesters of this event, toward people, women or men, who are working to advocate for healthier solutions, social solutions and health solutions for women, and who want to educate about the potential harms of abortion. We highlight the many coercive factors around abortion, including those social factors and relational factors, and challenge the lack of informed consent processes with regards to abortion that don't exist in other health settings. We also challenge the inconsistency in law in relation to abortion, particularly with regard to minors, and I'll give you a little bit of information about how that works. By protesting us talking about these issues, and I did put some invitations on that Facebook page for people who were protesting to please come in and hear us out. I'm not sure if any are in here, but if you are, everyone is welcome. But if you have done that courageously, you are really, really welcome, and I welcome your questions. But what those kinds of protests demonstrate to me when I do get the opportunities to speak, particularly to young women, is a fear. And it's a fear that if we talk too much about the potential harm of abortion or other solutions than abortion, that we won't have abortion available to them. And their fears with regards to that are about they won't have access to education, they'll miss out on their chosen career, promotions in their workplace, they may end up alone and unsupported, economically disadvantaged. Those fears can be very, very valid, and I think we need to pay attention to them. What we all need to pay attention to on all ends of the ideological spectrum, though, is that what abortion has done, what the availability has done, is not address any of those social, educational or professional issues for women. So I'm often accused when I talk to people about abortion of trying to throw women back to the 50s because, they'll be stuck in their homes and dependent on people, and my counter to that is, well, abortion hasn't got us very far as women then, has it? If that's the best we can do for women is force them to choose between their children and those other options, then we've really failed them. So I think the passion and the outrage of young protesters is understandable. It could be very powerful if we can do what I think really needs to be done in that, and that is start finding some common ground on which to improve the lives of all women. I had children young. I had my first child when I was 17, my second when I was 20. I raised them on my own until I married at age 35, did 3 degrees at uni in that time. So I don't not know how challenging all of those things are, and I think that women do need much greater supports to do it. I'm sorry we don't have the PowerPoint because I do actually have some pretty pictures, but what I do want to go through very quickly is a little bit of an overview of abortion. We do have between 80 and 90,000 abortions annually in Australia. We don't know the figure because accurate statistics aren't kept, except on post-20-week abortions, so I will be able to give you some accurate figures there. The reasons for abortions are mostly psychosocial, so they fit under the social, emotional and supportive and relational needs of women around I don't have enough money or nowhere to live or no one to support me or my partner doesn't want a baby or this is the wrong time, I'm too old, too young, I have too many children, etc., etc. So around 5% are for reasons of congenital abnormality of the unborn child, health reasons of the mother, and a very small percentage about sexual assault, pregnancies as a result of sexual assault. The argument for abortion is often that we need abortion to save the lives of mothers. Well, if we only used abortion to save the lives of mothers, invariably we would probably have many years where we had zero. In the UK in 2012 there were 185,122 abortions. Not one had to be done to save the life of a woman. So out of over 185,000, not one of them was necessary. So in Australia, when I really like to draw on the research that is done by abortion advocacy organisations, mostly because it is theoretically less open to criticism when you present their own research. It's not always the case. But a study done in 2007 by Melbourne Uni researchers through women presenting at the Pregnancy Advisory Service down there showed that 16% of women reported being in a violent relationship. And I still read stories all the time about, well, women in domestic violence situations need access to abortion because their partners might beat them or their partners don't want more children. I rarely hear from abortion advocacy organisations that we need to be doing something more about the domestic violence experienced by these women and helping them to get out of violent situations, helping them to have processes whereby they won't have to continue to engage on a lifelong basis with this man if they have a child. 10% had mental health problems. We know that having a mental health problem makes you far more likely to suffer psychologically after an abortion. 51% had a healthcare card. That's relevant because we know too that economics are a big reason for lots of women's abortions. 75% of women cited reasons that were more associated with just simply not wanting a child right now. And there were some other reasons around that, but it still was consistent that 95% of those were psychosocial. We know that with most of those cases from the international evidence that when a woman says, I have too many children, I don't have, I'm too young, or I want to finish my education, or I don't have enough money, that what she's saying when qualitative interviews are done is that, well, this is the best of all the bad choices. This is all I can do. So it's more about doing something she doesn't really want to do, but she can't find a way to do the other thing. So I believe, as do many researchers and health professionals, that that's very coercive. We can't say that women don't experience social coercion in that regard. It's around 70% of women in some international research studies that will say they felt pressured toward an abortion they didn't want. In Australia, that's about 63,000 women every year, or 250 women every working day of the year having an abortion they don't really want. So coercion is really, really, really significant. And something that is often unaddressed or at least not debated well with abortion advocates, which I think is sad. I do just want to, so we've got lots of time for questions. The only other thing I do want to talk to you about is late-term abortion, because I think that here is one of those areas where it's very, very difficult to get accurate information into the mainstream. And if you are going to argue a position, whether you have a philosophy that is against abortion or a philosophy that is looking for better supports for women, or you're sitting in the middle ground, or you have an abortion advocacy position, you really have to be able to shore up your position with the facts and not have the ideological arguments throw you off the facts. We've put these facts out on our website, and we still often get messages come through the website saying, you're a bunch of bigoted, religious, lying nutters. because none of that stuff is true, even though we put the actual government reports on the website. So, it's very, very difficult to break through that ideology. But the number of late-term abortions becomes significant when you consider community attitudes around abortion. The percentage of people who support abortion reduces dramatically once you start looking at past 12 weeks, let alone past 20 weeks and past 24 weeks. And yet in Victoria, and I'm only going to give you Victorian figures, in Victoria in 2009, 10 and 11, and 2011 is the latest year we have figures for, we had 410, 366 and 378 respectively post-20-week abortions. So I'm just giving you those 3 years as an example. More than half of those abortions in every one of those years and 7 years preceding that were for psychosocial reasons, not for health reasons of the mother and not for health reasons of the unborn child. Now, when we talk about congenital reasons with unborn children as well, we're not talking about conditions that are necessarily going to end the life of the child either. Women have abortions for surgically correctable conditions all the time, cleft lip, clubfoot, often very minor things. Then 2011, of 378 post-20-week abortions, 183 of them were for psychosocial reasons. So that's a lot of women who are being offered a surgical solution to their primarily social problem at a point where they are more than halfway through their pregnancy. More alarming is that 10 of those women were after 28 weeks. So well past the point of viability. At 28 weeks, their child had a 95% chance of surviving without any problems, and one after 37 weeks. Now, given what we had in the media when the wrong twin was terminated at the Royal Melbourne Hospital, the community outrage when a healthy baby was accidentally terminated, do you all remember seeing those headlines? Instead of the unhealthy baby. I don't know why, and yet that happened in that year 183 times. A healthy, viable baby was terminated and those women didn't get the other options. But one of them was at full term in that year, and that doesn't even get out into the media. So these are really important facts that I think must start to put us in some common ground with those who are advocating abortion. And my time's up. Thanks.
Thank you, Debbie, Greg and Rosie. Okay, it's time for some questions now. I said it before and I'll say it again. If you can make your questions questions rather than statements, that would be really, really good. Okay.
I'd like to address the politician who spoke. Corinna House sounds a really interesting concept, because if women are going to keep on having babies, then they're going to need housing for all those babies. And that housing is either going to have to be paid for by a man or by the government or presumably by charity. And Corinna House, land and housing, has always been a very important foundation of the Catholic Church. And Corinna House can either provide lessons for the rest of us in regard to the way it sees itself as running efficiently and effectively, or it can be just another part of the Catholic miasma of secrecy.
Can I ask, what was your question?
Can we go and visit Corinna House and see how...
Can we visit Corinna House?
I can't speak. I'm on the board, nor am I the CEO, but I mean, I brought along.
I mean the money, not just what the women sit round the table and talk about at dinner, but how the bloody land and housing is managed commercially.
Yeah, sure. No, well, listen, I mean, I invite you to have a look at their annual reports on the website. So it's an organisation which is formally registered, and it produces every year a very detailed annual report. And if you wanted to know more about the actual operation of Corinna House, I'm sure if you rang them up and ask, when you're next down to Canberra, you drop in and have a talk with them, I'd be very surprised if they'd say no. I mean, I simply made a cold call myself to become introduced to them. I had no association or affiliation at all. So I rang up cold and just asked, could I speak to the director, and that's how I got my contact. So I'd be very surprised if they say no. But their annual reports are very detailed.
Okay, thank you. If you guys hold that microphone up there. Any other questions? Yes.
This is just opening to the panel. So the area of abortions and the risks for the purpose of saving the mother's life seems to be one that we don't really touch too much, because if a woman's going to die, you're probably going to do the medically best thing to look after her. But in the case in which a woman is seriously struggling psychologically, and it is reasonable to assume that going through the pregnancy will hurt her enough that she's at risk of suicide, is it reasonable to allow abortion to save the mother's life there?
We already know that if a woman has a pre-existing mental health problem, and that would include any factors that contribute to her feeling suicidal, that she has a significantly increased risk of mental health problems post-abortion. There is no evidence anywhere in the literature that abortion as a procedure has a positive health effect for women, either psychologically or physically. So we're doing these sort of medical procedures, very obviously, very commonly, on the premise that they are beneficial to women from a health perspective, and that's simply not true. The evidence isn't there to support it. So if a woman is struggling psychologically, I've worked in an acute mental health facility, and women and men come in with all sorts of things. I've had a woman come in who had shot a bullet in her leg because she believed her father, who had abused her as a child, was living in her leg. One could put an argument forward and she wanted her leg amputated. So one could put an argument forward for, well, why can't we amputate her leg if she's so psychologically disturbed by that, and she's, going to kill herself if we don't do it. I would say that that's the same thing, but we don't do that because we recognise that what she has is a psychological and psychiatric illness that needs to be treated. We don't need to remove her leg.
Is there anyone that's currently involved in dealing with those mental health issues for women? So, obviously there's the basic counselling level and a lot of pregnancy help, but what about women with serious psychological problems that need to be helped through pregnancy? What kind of support is there available?
There is a perinatal mental health unit based in Melbourne. I believe there's one based in Sydney, but there's very little knowledge around about it. Again, this is one of those areas that's very, very difficult to get the education out there. And my experience is that in areas where there may not be a pregnancy support agency to refer to, for example, that GPs feel really poorly equipped for managing someone who is distressed and pregnant and saying, I don't want to be pregnant, and will often refer to an abortion clinic because that's the go-to place, that's what you do, and there is an expectation that she will be appropriately counselled at that clinic. Our evidence is that that's not the case either.
Did any of the other panel want to add anything, or we'll go to the next question?
I just make the general observation that, and once again, you can say, well, this is anecdotal, so that's all it is, but hopefully what I was able to illustrate from my presentation was that there's an unmet need out there for many women who, at a particular point, do feel that life is completely out of control and may well, in some instances, be either broaching or, in fact, could be diagnosed as having a serious psychological problem. But that if they were given or made available to them, provided with access to care, to enable a diagnosis, and then, like any other psychological process in terms of the way in which treatment is provided, that can be worked through with them without necessarily going straight to that point of, well, listen, your only option really is to have a termination. I just see many instances in talking to the people who are involved in the running of these organisations that sometimes the people come having spoken to, for example, a GP or some other practitioner, and get an answer which, for them anyway, hasn't been comprehensive or a complete explanation of what the options might be. And that's why they are actively seeking out this other advice or assistance.
Until such a point as we have adequate assistance, are you saying that every woman that is dealing with serious psychological problems should just be allowed to suffer? Until we have the ability to medically treat her for her psychological illness, do we just let her sit there being untreated?
We do have the ability to treat her, but the problem is that abortion is such an ideological issue, and it is the ideological stuff that throws GPs. And I've spoken to big medical conferences and they talk about these things. So we do have the facility. Just because a woman's pregnant doesn't mean we don't have the facility to treat her psychologically, just like any other person. The problem is that as soon as she's pregnant and presents with a psychological problem, we're too quick to say, well, it's the pregnancy, let's get rid of that. And the woman may indeed identify that it's the pregnancy. She might also, though, identify that it's her leg she wants amputated or something else. So, I think it's not that we don't have the resources to treat her, it's that we generally treat her with abortion because that's the ideological world that we live in.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question.
Alright, so my question is, there's a saying that it takes two to tango, and I was wondering, in your opinion, do you believe a man should have a high role where, say, the partner can have an abortion or not, because it's his child as well? I can understand that women have a high role in the pregnancy, it's just that should abortion be a two-sided decision, not just one person's decision?
It's a very, very complex issue because if you put forward an argument that a man should have a say about whether a woman has an abortion or not, you're putting forward an argument that he can say that she should. And we are trying to remove the coercive things around women who are having abortions because their partners might say that they should. Having said that, the fact is women have significantly more reproductive rights than men because the ball is completely in her court. She can either have the child or not. The man has no opt-out. So I think the most equal way that we could address that issue is that if a woman is going to be allowed to opt out of her pregnancy up to birth, which is the case in many states of Australia now, then a man should have that time when he could perhaps legally opt out of that pregnancy as well. I'm not suggesting this, I'm not a proponent of this by any means. I think fathers are desperately important in children's lives. But I think that would bring at least a little equality, where a man can say, well, I don't want a child, so why should I have to financially support it for 18 years when it's born? Please don't misquote me as saying they should be doing that, but that's the closest I can think of to come to that. Having said that, I have seen many men suffering after a partner's abortion, either because they were part of the process and they also now regret it, or because they had no say in the process. And just on a personal note, this happened in my family only last year, where my son's girlfriend had an abortion. Now, he didn't know she was going to. We didn't know she was going to. We bought baby things. They named their child. She then came under enormous pressure from her parents, had an abortion, told him about it 2 days later. And my son is 6 foot tall, shaven head with tattoos, the kind that you would cross the street. If you saw him coming and it was dusk, came around to tell me about it, stepped out of his car and collapsed in the driveway. And I have spent the better part of my energy and resources for this entire year in supporting my young suicidal son because his child was aborted. So this, let alone what it has done to us as well. So this is not something that only impacts women. And anyone who tells you that is just so completely misled or delusional. It does not only impact the woman, it can impact many, many people around her.
Absolutely.
Okay, next question. Yeah, Tom.
Say a woman goes to a shelter and has a baby, but she doesn't want to continue looking after it. Are there ways to then to put the baby up for adoption with her mother and her father?
Well, I'm not an expert in the adoption law, and perhaps some of the other panel members are, but yes, there is laws in our states and territories that do provide for the ability for the adoption of children. Now, the way in which the state becomes essentially the body that for at least a period of time is looking after the interests of the child, those circumstances can greatly vary. I mean, for example, there are instances where children are actually removed in a permanent way from a mother and or father, or both, because of the ongoing circumstances that child finds itself in. But there is a lot more sensitivity these days than there was in the past in the way in which the state examines the issue about whether or not the girl or the woman wishes to in effect surrender the child so that child can be then made available for adoption. In years gone by, you would have heard where it was quite facilitative, where single mothers often had children pretty much removed rather quickly and then passed on as adoptees by the state. That's changed quite dramatically. So the truth of the matter is there actually are very few adoptions taking place in New South Wales today and indeed around Australia. But the ability for a woman, or a girl or woman, to be able to in effect surrender a child for adoption still is available in this state and around Australia.
There are actually less than 20 adoptions in the whole of Australia of infants each year, so mothers who place their children for adoption. I think we need to be very careful. I think it does need to be an option for women if they go down that path. I think we need to be very, very cautious about what a lot of pro-life groups do, and that is wave the adoption, not abortion banner. I have a strong objection to that, because I think that what that does is really demonstrate complete ignorance about the reasons most women are having abortions. It's not because they don't want their children, and it also really doesn't place enough importance on that mother-child bond and that biological. Some people think a child would be better to be raised by a mum and a dad, as opposed to a biological single mother, and I believe all children have a right to a mother and a father. They have a right to at least one of those parents, even in the absence of the other. So I think we need to do everything we can in the first instance to support a woman to parent her child, if that's her choice.
Okay, we had a question over here.
Yes, for the politician, or perhaps for any one of you, could you please suggest what we as a society will have to do in order to convince our governments to not only reverse abortion, like to make it criminal, but moreover, to patrol that there is no underground abortions happening while abortion is illegal, and moreover, to put out a positive pro-life message, such as the governments do against smoking, for example. What we need to do in order for this to happen?
You've raised a number of profoundly questions there. Perhaps can I escape answering most of them by answering it this way. That if we're hoping that any time soon there's going to be a dramatic downturn in the instance of abortion here in New South Wales or indeed around Australia, I think that we are deluding ourselves. There is this, what is often I think a false understanding or false expectation that parliaments and governments are ahead of the game in a number of these important social policy areas and legislate to do things, to fix things, to change things, to make things happen. In other words, the government sort of have these debates, they pass the laws, and things change. My experience, and it's a limited experience, but experience nonetheless, is that what parliaments tend to do in a sort of a liberal democracy like we live here in New South Wales and Australia is that it's actually following trends that have already been made. It's actually, in some sense, catching up with what are attitudes, values, practices which are going on out there in society already. The issue of bringing down the numbers of abortions in this state and around Australia, if that's what's at the heart of your question, really resolves itself, or starts to resolve itself, if we start examining the issue of the question of the life of a human being and the rights that we attach to that life as a human being. But of course, in the context of obviously the unborn, that's seen through the prism of the people involved. There's obviously the mother carrying the unborn and also the father involved. A change in the hearts of the culture that we live in is what's going to ultimately over time address this issue. If we ultimately as a society move towards an understanding of what's at stake here and that we are talking about a human life and that there are rights that flow from it in terms of respect for that human life, I think that's when we'll start to see a change in the rates of abortion in the state and around Australia. I don't see that anytime soon there is going to be a dramatic increase because out there in society at large, I think that there is, at least for the time being, and I think you can perhaps look at countries overseas and present the argument that attitudes are changing in some places overseas, but I think for the time being in Australia we've got a big job ahead of us, so to speak, to persuade and influence the community at large that from a cultural point of view there is a big issue here that we really need to look at and discuss and examine and go back and perhaps revisit some of the arguments that we used before to bring us to the point where we are now. And governments, a government of the day can't legislate for that change.
So I tend to think that abortion is like a modern day analogy for the slavery. It was legal some years ago, right?
Yeah.
And now it is all of a sudden abolished. At least it's illegal, although it still happens.
Yeah.
I think abortion is similar but worse. And if slavery could have been abolished, abortion can be too. But we need, the whole society to vote against it, basically. And that's kind of I was hoping to deduct from the answer what we should be doing.
Well, I'll just go back to my point. At the end of the day, if you're talking about a strict democratic process, that's what we're talking about. We're living in a state where there is a parliament with two houses. The arithmetic's pretty clear. You actually have to be able to get the numbers in both houses to pass a law to bring about that change that you're advancing. But we're not even on the playing field in regard to that. There is general consensus in the parliament that, choose my words carefully, that the ability for a woman to control her fertility and through that have access to Medicare-funded abortion is a generally accepted principle. It's held with the majority of people who occupy seats in the parliament. So the parliament's reflecting what are essentially views held by the society at large. It doesn't mean that those views won't change or potentially change over time, but what I'm saying to you is I'm essentially describing to you the sort of temperature at the moment of where the thing is, the issue is.
I think if you want to change the attitude of people around you to abortion, there's a couple of things you can do. One is you can join a political party and have a say that way. Another thing is support the people around you, the young people around you who are having children. So go and offer a young couple a night's babysitting so they can go out. don't say, well, that's not my social circle, so I won't, I'll just leave them to it. Just going back to what you were saying about psychological problems with pregnancy. Pregnancy is not easy. For some people it's a dream. No, they're never healthy and they're never happy. But for some people it is your worst hangover and it goes on for months. And you are throwing up and you just want a lamb kebab and a can of Coke and you just want to go to bed. And you need to just be aware of that with women. Like, I look okay today, but had you seen me yesterday? We have, you get extremely tired. Give the seat to the pregnant woman on the bus and the train. Just do the little bit you can to help the pregnant women, to show them that we care, we get it, we know it's tough, it's hard. I think as more and more women go back to work and have fewer children, women now find themselves at home alone in an empty street with no one to talk to except this baby who can't talk and takes most of their day and most of their night. And it would be quite easy to slip into some kind of psychological meltdown through that process. I have a mother's group. We all happen to be Catholic and we all happen to be open to life. And the women have said, this mother's group is my lifeblood. It's kept me going, it's kept me sane, and it's only that I can come here and openly vent about the issues with my children, the problems that I'm suffering, the sickness, the tiredness, that I can then go back and do another week out in the world where people just don't want to hear it and they want to say to you, well, you made a choice, you've got control over that, why did you let it happen? And it's really not as simple as that. It's really about us all getting together and supporting all the people we know in what they're doing and changing the attitude slowly that way.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. James, you had a question?
So I was wondering what you think can be done to sort of change the ethos and the mindset of the medical community, particularly doctors. Like as Rosie was saying, that many women who have pregnancies are pressured to get these sort of dangerous tests done and to test for specific abnormalities and promote the idea of abortion as well. And there's big emphasis on medicine these days to treat the person as a whole and to treat people with compassion. But clearly with like a lot of doctors and medical staff, that's not really coming through. I'm sure they don't know about a lot of the support groups that that Greg was talking about. So yeah, I'm just wondering what can be done to sort of change that mentality.
Well, one thing I'd say that I think perhaps is at least part answer to your question is the need for us, where we are at this point in time, to make sure that the conscience rights of people of faith, but even people of no faith, who do not support being associated with or participating in procedures like abortion, are respected. In fact, our problem that we're facing today in a very practical way is worse than you think, because there is pressures brought to bear, as I understand it, on doctors and nurses and in some instances allied health workers who wish not to be associated with the practice of abortion, to be in fact associated with that practice of abortion. And I mean, I guess the instance I can use best is the Tasmanian legislation that was passed, was it 2010 Tasmanian Act, which in effect, in particular circumstances, can require a doctor to act against his conscience and conduct a termination procedure. So we actually do have this oppression happening right now. So in some sense we have to hold the line and fight back against this oppression, which already there are some manifestations of. And whilst holding the line, push back and then give encouragement, for example, to people of faith and people who respect life to become involved in the practice of medicine and nursing and allied healthcare to enable that respect for life, if I describe it that way, to be more fulsomely recognised in the practice of medicine and caring. Now, once again, that will take time. The colleges, for example, the medical colleges, like the colleges for obstetrician and gynecologists. The college, for example, without digressing too much, took a very hard line in New South Wales last year in opposition to that bill that was before the New South Wales Parliament, which we mentioned earlier, the Zoe's Law bill, which was a bill that actually was endeavouring to provide an ability to prosecute a person whose acts brought about the death of an unborn fetus of 20 more weeks gestation, but with an exemption that there would be an exemption with respect to the killing of the fetus for medical procedures. So the actual bill was clearly written to ensure that, with respect to a medical termination, that was not one of the instances that was designed to sort of protect the fetus against. So went as far as we possibly could to get the bill through the Parliament to explicitly exempt the termination procedure, and yet the college came out very strongly saying, well, that's still not satisfactory because the effect of this bill, if passed, would recognise personhood of the unborn, and that has potential to create serious problems for the practice or for medical practitioners. So, there's a fair bit of work to be done as we speak to just hold the line and not slip backwards, to say nothing about trying to build ourselves back, which obviously is not what we want to do.
Okay, next question. Did you have a question? Yeah?
I was just wondering what the government is doing in terms of offering alternatives to abortion. Like, I do understand that there are places for people to go, but is there any funding from the government to these places? Is there help for childcare allowances, stuff like that?
I'll give you a small anecdote, which I think, and I'm not being party political there, although you can probably on the timeline work out which political party it was. Pretty soon after, not long after I had that event with those service providers doing this work, I said to myself, well, listen, why don't we get them together and see if I can persuade the Minister, then Minister for Family and Community Services, just to come along and meet these people and just talk to them about what they do. I wasn't trying to hit up the government for a cheque. I wasn't trying to get ahead of the game in any way, but just rather introduce the then Minister to this rather disparate group to just see what they do and allow them to just talk about what they do and how, a government could possibly assist in what they're doing. And I liaised with the Minister's office and I said, listen, these people would really like the opportunity to meet with you. And they are completely flexible to meet at any time, on any day, that would suit you. And the Minister would not meet them. The Minister would not meet them. Now, we've got a very polite letter back from the Minister's staff, no doubt we drafted it, said the Minister's very busy, and the Minister obviously has many callings on time. But that's sort of illustrative of how far we've got to go. This was a Minister who, in fact, had been informed by me of all of this work. And forget about me, but had been informed by someone of all this work. There's clearly a huge need out there. As the Minister of the Crown in this area of family and community services is well versed with all the issues associated with the needs here. And yet, wouldn't give us, allow us in 15 minutes, which ministers give out all the time, interestingly, the people doing this work and the organisations actually aren't chasing money, or in some instances not much money at all. They don't actually want to become, beholden to money being sort of, paid out from the government to them. They're happy to do what they do, but they would greatly appreciate some acknowledgement and some insights by the government today of their good works, and if it's all possible, to provide the assistance like Perennia House, where they gave them a couple of, I think, houses which were probably due to be sort of either pulled down or renovated, and which became then sort of like seed funding to get their sort of whole initiative up and running. But, there has to be obviously the confronting of governments and the confronting of ministers with these things and basically wearing them down. That's the way to get things done in politics, you've got to wear them down. In some respects, the current draft of the Zoe's Law Bill number 2, it was a number 1, but we're actually under the second iteration number 2, which might I say passed the lower house overwhelmingly but didn't pass the Legislative Council, does contain obvious paradox in it, and you've identified that paradox. That there was what you would call an exemption provision, which would prevent the mother of the unborn being prosecuted pursuant to the Act for grievous bodily harm because she had consented to the procedure which led to the unborn being terminated. Now, I guess that's indicative of the point that I was making a bit earlier about how far we've got to go. Those involved in trying to deal with the Zoe's Law Bill, and whilst I had some involvement with it, I didn't actually have the carriage of it. The carriage was actually from the mother of Zoe, who actually lived up on the Central Coast. Her local state member was the one who sponsored the bill. That was the extent to which they were prepared to go to try and present a bill that could be at least broadly accepted. In other words, the people involved with it knew the argument would be used against the bill, as you described now before. Listen, if you don't have this provision here, what about the issues associated with the termination of pregnancy of a mother? So people, in some sense, bit their lip and said, well, listen, we'll put the exemption in, but the bill still will have relevance in instances where there is grievous bodily harm which does not involve the mother. And in the instance of Zoe's matter, the mother got run over. She actually got pinned to a tree. She was squashed up against a tree for about, I think, nearly an hour. And by the time they got to the hospital, when baby Zoe was born, and Zoe was 28, 32 weeks old, there was no way to recover. The fetus had died. These are very clear instances where there are actions taken by a third person to act in a way to grievous bodily harm to the mother, but also to acknowledge grievous bodily harm towards the unborn. And at least that was starting to give some recognition that there was actually the killing of a person. But of course, therein lies the issue, which became the big argument with the likes of the College of Obstetrician Gynecologists and a number of others, that once you actually gave a personal status to the unborn, albeit in these circumstances and albeit with the exemption for the mother, that was a bridge too far, because that would then be used to sort of then move forward and sort of argue the case for further rights. So that's where it became something. Now, I might say in a number of jurisdictions overseas from Australia, these types of bills have been successfully passed through parliaments or legislatures, and I would hope we could have another go here in New South Wales. But I've got to say the opposition was very, very strong and very, very vigorous.
Okay, thank you for all your questions. Thank you to our panellists. I'll just invite Cecilia, and others. No? That was so good. You could try it. I don't know. I think it's sometimes working.
So on behalf of the Catholic Society of St. Peter, we'd like to thank each of you, Deputy Garratt, Greg Donnelly and Rosina Gordon, for taking the time out of your busy lifestyles to be here with us today. We thank you for sharing with us your knowledge, your experience and your stories in allowing us to gain many insights on abortion, as the lives of women are very important and just as important as the lives of the born and the unborn. So we'd like to present you with a small token of gratitude and many thanks.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank each and every one of you for being a wonderful audience and for soldiering on throughout this weather. So thank you.